Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Career Conversations. This is our first podcast session, and the whole objective of this podcast is for us to have conversations about careers. That makes the name quite suiting. So, my name is Farhan Yusuf, and I am a pharmacist by profession, and I have been working in the health sector in Tanzania for the last over 10 years. But then I also have a very keen passion on in education, in careers, which is why I'm part of this conversation today, and I shall be your host. And I'll let my guest today introduce himself before I talk a little bit about our theme.
Thank you so much, Farhan, for having me and for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. So my name is Dr. Mohamed Zahir. I am, by training, a molecular geneticist and a genetic counselor. But in principle, I am a lecturer at the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology at Muhimbili University. I'm also the co-founder and currently serving as the General Secretary of the Tanzania Human Genetics Organization.
Thank you,
Thank you for
Mohammed.
having me.
Karibu sana, and thank you for making time today. When I talk a little bit about our theme for today, I think everyone listening will understand why we picked Mohamed Zahir for our first podcast. So our theme for today is unconventional careers, right? We are talking about, or we are trying to highlight careers that are not very common, that are not, the first thing that comes to people's mind when they're choosing careers. And so that is why we thought it would be great to have a conversation with Mohammed, because even being a health professional, some of the things he mentioned sometimes pass over my head as well. So it would be nice for him to simplify some of these things for us. I think to start off, Mohammed, I would, I think a good place to start is, do you think what you have done is an unconventional career pathway, and why so?
That's a beautiful question, and I'm really glad that you ask this, because I think it is important in this particular context to define what an unconventional career or unconventional pathway means, because from a global context, what I've done in other parts of the world, it's quite normal. So we really have to look at it from where we are, our country, our environment, our community. In that context, I would define something as unconventional when it is rare, when you would not find enough number of people in that particular field. And so indeed, yes, from a Tanzanian context, from our community context, yes, I have ventured into a very unconventional path. But I think very soon this is going to change.
And we hope to hear more about that in
Absolutely.
the conversation today. I like the word that you use, context, Muhammad, because as I have conversations about careers with a lot of young people, I always tell them that is something that's very important to realize when you're choosing your career. It's very important to think about the context of where you want to see yourself and where you're going to end up. I think having that in mind always helps chart a better pathway. So moving on with your journey, can you tell us about your experience in pursuing this unconventional career professional path, and what motivated you to move away?
Very, very interesting question. So my journey really started, if I can recall, about 17, 18 years ago when I was still doing my A-levels. Back then, in fact, I was among those people that wanted to do pharmacy. I wanted to become a pharmacist. Until Form 4, I had no clue what biotechnology was, or what human genetics is all about, or what molecular biology is all about. Then I came across a group of folks from University of Dar es Salaam, and I believe that was the first batch in Tanzania that indeed ventured into a field called biotechnology. And they organized a sort of a career fair, and they came to Shaban Robert. I studied A-levels in my Shaban Robert and did my O-levels in Zizima. So when they came to Shaban Robert for the career fair, that's when I met Dr. Daniel Maida, who's a really good friend, a brother, a mentor. And he introduced me to what biotechnology is all about. And I think once I found out, did some more reading about biotechnology, that's where my entire view about the career that I wanted to pick changed. And immediately I was like, pharmacy is not for me, and I want to venture into biotechnology simply because of the novelty that it brought, and the kind of things that a biotechnologist does was so much more intriguing to me personally. And so that was the beginning for me to really venture into this field. So I then went on and did my bachelor's in biotechnology in Manipal University, India. Thereafter, I was thinking about a master's program, because in such a field, it's important to not only specialize, but then it's important to super specialize as well. So for my specialization, I went for molecular biology as my master's, and then ended up doing a PhD in the field of medical genetics, where I was looking at all sorts of genetic conditions that is caused by all sorts of problems in the DNA. So that's how my sort of career really went out from the conventional to an unconventional path.
Interesting, Mohammed. Then, fun fact for you, you may not know this, but when I applied for my bachelor's degree program, and at that point of time, Muhimbili University was an affiliate of the University of Dar es Salaam. So my first choice was bachelor's in pharmacy, but my second choice was a bachelor's in biotechnology.
Oh,
and I was like, if I don't get pharmacy, then I'll do biotechnology. And a lot of that was inspired by a childhood of Dexter's Laboratory.
Right.
I don't know how many people listening to this podcast today even know about that cartoon.
Totally relate.
But it was quite it is what actually inspired me to take a career in science, actually, and biotechnology was always something that I found fascinating as well. Now, Mohammed, why should people think about unconventional career pathways? Like, what are the advantages, what are the different opportunities that are there according to what you have been seeing and experiencing?
Sure. So I mean, I think it's a given that most people will understand that the rate at which technology is evolving, and the rate at which different fields are being born, simply because there is a lot more interdisciplinary conversations happening. Today, if you want to do something meaningful, whether it's business, whether it's science, whether it's medicine, you need a team of people that have different backgrounds. And so that has sort of created an evolution of people that, I think you are one of them. You ventured into pharmacy, but then went on to do a master's in health economics, simply because now you saw that, well, what can I do to complement my pharmacy education with something along the lines of costing and health economics and policy planning and so on and so forth. So in the same context, it is extremely important to understand that the way the world is evolving, the way the fields are evolving, the way technology is evolving, some of those traditional conventional paths are really now in the decline, because number one, they're being saturated, so there's too many people with the same qualification. And if you're looking to start something new, even if it's a startup, or you are looking for a job, to start with, people are looking for, what novelty are you bringing to the team? So you have a bunch of pharmacists, applying to be a pharmacist somewhere, but the one that will really stand out would be that added qualification that might be different. So that's something that you're bringing into the team that is different from what ideally a person would bring. And so that is the basis of my argument, saying that people really need to slowly and surely, I say slowly and surely because we need to be aware of our environment and what would work in our context. I think context is extremely important in this case. But people are more and more, I believe, nowadays understanding the importance of having different sort of degrees or different sort of qualifications to supplement what they actually want to accomplish. And I think even the way that a conventional path is flourishing and evolving over time, they need additional skill sets that would complement with the work they're doing. And for that, they need diversity of skills and qualifications. I think generally that's the trend nowadays. And more I see people, especially from a Western perspective, they venture into programs for which there is no job prospect, so to speak, but then they create it. And they sell themselves in a way that I'm going to bring to your company or to your hospital or to your institution A, B, C set of skills to complement the existing work that you do. And before you know it, people are interested because you're now bringing in something that's allowing them to do to stick to the vision and mission of whatever the organization is, but it allows them to do something in a more sort of effective manner, but at the same time to a better outreach as well. So those are some of the components I would say you should look at.
Mohammad, after hearing to you, the two words sort of that come to my mind are agility and adaptability, and I think these two facets are also very important, especially as you mentioned in today's time and age where we are talking about exponential growth, and we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution. And by the way, all of these are things that I think everyone listening should definitely research about, know about. They're very helpful concepts for us in today's time and age. And so as we think about these kinds of things, it's very important for people to not be rigid as far as their careers are concerned, and always be able to adapt and move according to how the wind goes, as they say. But Muhammad, definitely, as nice as it seems to take this, non-conventional pathway and to be a path breaker, I'm sure it comes with its own interesting set of challenges, right? And I'm sure there's a long list of that. So if you can take us through some of these challenges that you went through, and how did you overcome them?
Sure. So it's not one. It's as you correctly mentioned. It's multifaceted, and it's really. It depends on how you perceive that challenge. Most of the time, if you are a positive oriented person, you take that challenge and see it as an opportunity, and then twist it and see, okay, how am I going to do something about this? So first and foremost, I think it's really coming out of that shell. Okay, like I told you, so I was going to be a pharmacist, and my mom and dad, both of them know what a pharmacist does, and in principle, I think most of our parents, community, nation at large, would want their child to take a career whereby they know that there is a steady source of income, you are sort of settled, and then we have that conventional, you want to have a degree, you get a job that's paying you well, then you can have a family, and so on and so forth. But then the challenge first is now, how do you explain, in my case, how do you explain your parents what biotechnology is in the first place? So I'm very grateful to both my mom and dad, because they, even I still don't understand, I don't know actually, if they still understand very well what biotechnology is. But I must say that both my mom and my dad were extremely supportive towards my decision of moving away from pharmacy and really getting into biotechnology. Even though at that time, I'm talking really of 17, 18 years ago, biotechnology itself was a very new phenomenon in the country. So now I had to explain to them what this is all about. So there was that bit. It wasn't really a challenge for me, but I can imagine that a lot of people will have challenges about how do you relay this information to your parents and break out into a career that is unheard of, that is unconventional, and that you also don't know whether it is going to help you to pay your bills, because that's eventually very important for survival. The other thing is now also to look at the right sort of institution for training. So where am I going to study it? And what is the future? So where am I going to study it is one bit. Can I afford it? Is the second bit. And then when I'm done with my degree, can I come back? Who will employ me? How can I get into or penetrate into the market of where I want to stay? And most of the times in the past, people used to see like, okay, you're going abroad for studies, you should probably look at staying there or migrating out of Tanzania, which I strongly I'm against, because I'm one of those people that believe that we need to catch up on the brain drain that has happened over the last couple of decades from Africa, and I believe that we should be the change makers and make that balance come back. We should be the ones to bring that gain again. So there is that bit, where I'm going to study and who's going to employ me. And then on top of that, there's another challenge as to now you are coming back after studies. You want to now understand who are the players. How do you want to play the game? Because every field has its own set of challenges. So how do you want to play the game? Who are the big players? What can you do to sort of build that network and partnership with them? And on top of that, how do you make sure that you're learning actively with what's happening? Because many a times, and I think this is true for any sort of field, you study something at university level, but when you really are into the job, into the market, doing the field work, what you've studied and what's actually happening on the ground level are totally opposite scenarios. So it's there. That's where the agility comes in, and how are you going to be able to adapt to that environment, particularly if you've not studied in the country that you want to work in, because there are totally different cultures and values that you associate yourself with. So there is that challenge as well, and I think for any person that's venturing into a program or a degree that's relatively new in the country, you really need to be able to find the right kind of mentor. And on top of that, understand who the players are, where are they located, how do you reach out to them, how do you network with them, what can you do to learn from them, how do you participate in research meetings, for instance, or simply get into a platform whereby you have access to that person, because eventually you want to look at them, you want to be inspired by them, you want to be motivated by the work they do, and you want to learn how they're playing the game so that you're also in the same market. So there are those challenges that I personally would say are very important.
Thank you, Mohammed. I feel like there can be a separate podcast on so many of things that you have mentioned, because
Yes.
they're topics that we can definitely dig into. But one thing that I resonate with as well is just having that the people around you sort of maybe not understanding what you do, because funny enough I do pharmacy, but as you know, I have ventured into some very unconventional things within a conventional career like
Right.
pharmacy, right? Which is another thing to think about, that
Right.
it doesn't have to be just an unconventional career, but there are unconventional pathways within conventional careers as well.
Absolutely.
Right? And I don't think to date even my family understands what I do. If you were to go and ask them, they'd be like, yeah, Farhan is a pharmacist. But if you were to ask them beyond that,
Yeah.
I don't think they would be able to explain. But
Right.
just having that space of do, as long as it makes sense to you and you know what you're doing, and you do see that pathway for yourself, venture on it. So definitely a lot of importance on support system from family, from close people, from mentors, as you mentioned. And I think we'll dig a bit into that
Sure.
later. But for now, one thing that I'm thinking about is that people are hearing what you do and they're hearing your passion. What does a day in the life of Mohamed Zahir look like with what you're doing, right? So that
Okay.
people also have an idea and a flavor of what that looks like.
Right. So that's a tough question, and I'm going to answer it from an academic perspective, and I believe all academicians will agree to what I'm just about to tell you, is that there has not been a single day where I have a routine. So what my Monday this week looks like will probably be completely different from what my next Monday will look like, and that will be completely different from what my Tuesday will look like. So there is no single day where I am repeating or that I have a routine timetable. I don't, and I don't believe any academician has. All right, but in principle, what I do, or in the day of Mohamed Zahir, so to speak, I am a lecturer predominantly, right? So I teach bachelor students, I teach master students, I supervise master and PhD students on various levels. And so there is the teaching element. You have a set sort of timetable that you need to deliver a certain lecture for this particular group of people, and then there is the whole calendar that is relayed to us, that is coming before the beginning of the year, and we sort of stick to that. We have to teach. So there's teaching. The second thing I do is also supervision of research projects. That means that for any degree program, whether it's master's or bachelor's programs, those students need to undergo a research project, and they need to come up with as a deliverable. They need to come up with a thesis, and so I normally get quite a number of students that I need to supervise the research projects, and based on that, we have multiple meetings talking about where you want to do your research, in which institution, what is your sample size, what is the disease that you're looking at, why this particular disease, is there a gap in it? And then we start having these discussions about how to write the proposal. We get that proposal ethically cleared, and then there is data collection and so on and so forth. So there's a whole research process. Then I'm also expected as an academician to engage into my own research. So I am very passionate about research related to genetic conditions. So anywhere from cardiomyopathies to leukemia to oncology to neurological disorders, I'm very interested in them. And so I spend a lot of my time reading scientific papers that are to keep myself up to date, but then also try and plan out proposals or ideas in which I'm applying for grants to address some of the research questions that we do not know answers for yet within the context of these diseases. So there is so much that, in Tanzania, in Africa in general, that has not been covered from a research perspective. So there is that bit. I spend a lot of my time also on Zoom calls, right? And I believe this is the norm post the pandemic. We spend a lot of time planning. I sit on multiple boards, so whether it's the Tanzania Human Genetics or it's the Africa Society, and various other boards where I am either in the capacity of a mentor or a capacity of an executive member or a leadership position, irrespective. We plan the year, what we are going to do with that particular program. So there's lots of planning going on over Zoom. I also see a lot of patients for genetic counseling. So post my PhD, I did a postgraduate diploma in genetic counseling. And so after that, I'm now beginning to sort of open up towards seeing patients that would benefit from genetic testing and from genetic counseling. So I work with different types of medical doctors, including neurologists, oncologists, cardiologists, and the like. Wherever we think that there might be a genetic predisposition to a particular disease, those patients they do get sent to me for counseling purposes, and then we provide genetic testing as a service and provide help that these results, and hope that these results will help the clinician make an informed decision about the management of the patient. So we work a lot with the different sort of multidisciplinary team players. Apart from that, I have also in my daily life playing sports. That is very important. So I play volleyball, and there is a lot of family time involved. So I have a lot of time that I keep for my family. I have a lot of mentees, so I spend a lot of time talking to these mentees and trying to help them realize their goals. And then there's a lot of traveling. So I do a lot of traveling for workshops, conferences, and the like. So that is in principle what the life of an academician in short looks like.
Mohammed, that does seem like a lot, and I'm happy to hear that you mentioned sports, because my next question was going to be, when do you live your life?
Right.
After hearing that long list of things that you do, very interesting and fascinating. Mohammed, who do you consider an inspiration as far as your career pathway is concerned? It could be one person, it could be multiple people. Who inspires you to do what you do?
So personally, I'm not a huge fan of the word inspiration. I think inspiration is very heavy in the sense that we have a lot of people that call themselves, motivational speakers and inspirations. And I think the word is thrown out quite frequently to the point that I get very uncomfortable saying inspiration. But I think what I would use is who do I see someone that I want to be like, or I want to follow, right? So I would start with Professor Karim as someone who has been a very instrumental figure in my life as a father figure, but also someone who has really guided me in my career. I've also been inspired by Professor Julie Makani, who's a pioneer when it comes to the field of sickle cell disease in the country, and just working with her, seeing her work has been very, very sort of enlightening for me as a scientist. I have been very, very closely working with Dr. Siana Ankia. She is also the co-founder of the Tanzania Human Genetics Organization. So I learn a lot from her. She is my elder sister. So I learn a lot from her as well. And sometimes it's not only about learning from those that are above you or older to you or more experienced to you. Sometimes you get very much touched and motivated by those guys who are your mentees, or even in high school, or kids. So that is why I don't like to use the word inspiration, because I think you can learn from anyone and anywhere. And so I also have a lot of respect and admiration for the youth, especially because they challenge me to think outside, and normally we say outside the box, but I'd normally try and say that we should not imagine that there is a box in the first place. And I think that's when you really have your creative freedom. So I get motivated from, all sorts of spectrum, not necessarily only the scientific field. I get inspired by sports people. I get inspired by community leaders. I get inspired by political leaders, so to speak, because everyone has something unique that you want, or that you would like you to have, or that you can learn from. And I think that would be my way of even advising, and that's what I tell my mentees all the time, that you don't have to be Muhammad. You don't have to do what I do, but you take what is working for me, and you take what is working for other people, and you do you. So you combine these elements of positivity from all spheres of, or the entire spectrum of life, and sometimes you even learn what not to do. So what mistakes I am making, you don't want to make that. So you will also learn from that. So that's how I see sort of what I would like to follow, people that I like to follow.
Thank you, Mohammed. Two things that come to mind from hearing you. One is something for those who are listening. Learning is a word that is being used many times in that, and it's something that I subscribe to as well. That be a sponge, as they say, and take in from your surroundings, from different people, etc. Just continuously have that mindset of learning. And the other thing that I liked, Mohammed, about what you just mentioned is that the people who you mentioned are inspirational to you, or people who you learn from are all people from Tanzania. Because I think the other thing also that I often hear from young people is that they don't necessarily know the experts in our field that are in country. There's this feeling of, and of course that can be a whole other podcast on itself, local studies and what's happening in Tanzania, etc., which I know is again something that both of us are very passionate about. And before the podcast we were speaking, and I was telling Muhammad that I just met today someone who has a PhD in supercomputing, and they are a Tanzanian and they are working here. And so I also through this podcast and these conversations want to sort of put forth the amount of work that's happening in Tanzania and in other African countries, perhaps to remove or at least alleviate to a certain extent that aspect of brain drain that we were talking about earlier. So thank you for sharing that, Muhammad. Now, unconventional career, great, there's a lot that you're doing, that you are, but when we think of high school students, when we're thinking, of course the idea of this podcast is for it to be for people from different age groups, whether you are a young student figuring out what career you want to take, or you are a someone who is well in their career, and whether you're having a midlife crisis or not, and you're thinking about changing careers. We hope that this podcast can sort of give food for thought to people in all these groups. But there's always this fear, this anxiety about taking these kinds of paths, and
Yes.
both in the individuals who want to take these kinds of decisions, but then also in the people around them, right? As you mentioned, it's very important to have family support, etc. What would you say would help with easing some of that anxiety and easing some of those fears, both from a individual perspective and for the parents and the people who surround these individuals?
Sure. Another very relevant and very important question that needs to be addressed. So in principle, yes, if you look at how I started, 17, 18 years ago in the field of biotechnology, I think a lot of people who are not aware of the field, and at the same time, this concept of mentorship was sort of non-existent. So perhaps our generation had, and the ones before, had to go through it the hard way. So you really figure out, you fail, you figure out again, you fail again, and you fail and you fall, and then you have to pick yourself up, and what did you learn, and then reapply. Nowadays, I think the current generation and the generations to follow, I want to believe that they are very blessed in the sense that this concept of mentorship is quite out there. It's about how proactive you are in finding the right person you can talk to, you can relate to, and discuss about a particular field that you're interested in venturing. And I see there's a lot of efforts, from a community but also outside community perspective, that many people are now beginning to understand this. In principle, there is a lot of insecurity, especially looking at unconventional pathways. I mentioned about, how are you going to meet your ends? How are you going to pay your bills? And that's a very important question. In this particular context, there is a little bit of that element in you that, okay, I'm here. This is the degree I have. I've come back to Tanzania in my case. This field is absent. Now what am I doing? Have I understood the bigger picture? So of course there are two sides of everything. There's the technical picture, which is part of what makes you flourish in your career, but then there is also that bigger picture that you need to understand who the players are and how do I get access to them. So it is very important to find out who these guys are, where they are, how can you access them, how do you talk to them, how do they motivate you to work. And then the second thing is that you need to believe in yourself. And there are three things that I live by. There's perseverance, there's focus, and there's hard work. You have to be proactive. You don't have to give up, right? And you need to focus on what you really want in life. I think if you have these three things and you're able to find the right kind of mentor, even if that particular field does not exist, you will be in a position to create it. And if there is enough passion, self-belief, and motivation in a person, I think if there are parents listening, then that should be enough to let the child do what he or she wants to do. Because in the end, you need to be passionate about your field, about what you want to do. And if they're worried about money, that passion will bring money. You can't get into something conventional for the sake of making money, because you will not grow in that sense. You will make money, but you will not grow the way you want to grow with a happy sort of trajectory. So I would say that it's important to look at the right people, to find the right sort of mentors, and to have that self-belief, and to be proactive in that particular field. So opportunities don't come to you. You can't be sitting at home and wait for somebody to come and contact you. You need to put yourself out there, attend conferences, network, develop partnerships, attend just seminars in universities, just random classes. Just go sit there. You will learn a lot, and that way you will understand the game. And I think when you mix that knowledge, awareness, proactiveness, and that self-belief, I think then you don't need to be worried about money. Of course, this goes without saying that there is a little bit of luck, right? There is a little bit of prayers that we need, that we have to, we need to come at the right place at the right time to make something meaningful happen. So there is that bit, but I think if you're patient enough, if you're persistent enough, if you're focused enough, you will get there, and the money will come.
Thank you, Mohamed. And I think just to add to some of the things that you've mentioned is, and my next question was actually going to be about financial security, but you seem to have answered that. But I think, there's a lot of talk or thought process around financial security and not enough about financial management, in that,
Right.
we don't really talk to our youngsters from a very early age. This is not something that's necessarily taught in school, it's and so I'm like, perhaps if people were better financial managers and were making good decisions about how they're using their finances, etc.
Yeah.
This is where also there's that discussion around, again, local education versus foreign education, and how much you're spending for what versus what you are getting.
Yeah.
So there's this thought process around financial management that needs to come before you even think about financial security, and perhaps
Correct.
that would help some of our young people as well, in addition to some of the things that you've
Absolutely.
already mentioned.
Absolutely.
And as we talk about support system, Mohammed, which has come up many a times in this conversation, how can other organizations, so whether it is community organizations, educational institutions like schools, even universities, what can they do to help people, or to create, as we call, an enabling environment for people to be able to pursue these kinds of careers?
Yeah.
And any thoughts on supportive programs? I know you've strongly mentioned mentorship, so perhaps that's one thing definitely to consider, but
Sure.
any other thing that comes to mind?
So I think we are already doing that by being part of this show. I think organizations like the Kodashia International Jamaat via the Career Hub is already doing is already in the right direction, creating this sorts of programs or conferences and events to give that platform to people or programs that are rather unconventional. And I think a lot of other institutions need to do similar programs for various other items. I think it's also a two-way street. You can't necessarily expect, and I think we had this discussion just before the recording started, is that this needs to be a two-way street. You need these professional organizations, the unconventional sort of parts, to come out and really market what they do. And I think we're not doing enough of that. And for instance, joining a career fair at a high school is already a very good place to start from, because that's where you want to really engage with the teenage group or the youth to look at a field from a different perspective, and to get that awareness to that level that, okay, tomorrow if I'm doing, let's say, PCM or PCB in my A levels, what are the career prospects? What are the types of careers I'm looking at? And it should not be your traditional, conventional choices that come to your brain, but you should expand, or at least these career fairs should enable a person to think outside of those conventional parts. So there's the element that high school students should benefit from, from high school organizations, but also organizations like the Koja Shia Ishnashi Jamaat, but also professional associations. So we've got the Neurology Association, we've got the Genetics Organization, we've got the Physiotherapy Association that you're talking about. I think we really need to create more awareness and to market these sort of fields in a way that's palatable for high school students, but also for the parents, because it is very important that it needs to be understood from a broader perspective, from a broader context. And in fact, I was just having a meeting with a colleague from the Ministry of Health, and we are now really thinking about how to develop a policy or to develop programs that will enable fields that are within the human genetics program to be part of the scheme of service. Because end of the day, it is important that whatever you're studying, there is somebody who's going to employ you, or there is an opportunity to be self-employed, or there's an opportunity to establish something that will then enable you to grow into that field and to grow as a person. So I think it's not one person's responsibility, but I think it's a collective responsibility as a society that we need to talk about more and more, these unconventional paths.
Yes, and I think, some of the things that you mentioned, for example, you mentioned participation in career fairs, but I think we need more career fairs to start with. Like, that in itself is something that's quite a rarity, even within many of our educational institutions. I think that's definitely something. And I think what would also help is, again, internships, placements, etc., especially for the younger people, because, they need to do so that they know whether that's something they really want to do for the rest of their lives. And I think those kinds of programs would really help with, crystallizing some of these thoughts in the minds of the people. So before we wrap up for today, Mohamed Zahir, you just mentioned about how organizations need to do better.
Yeah.
So I will give the floor to you to talk to us about how the organization that you are a part of, what does it do, and how does it create more awareness about the work that you're doing?
All right, thank you so much. I think this is my time to really market the human genetics fields, and thank you for giving me that opportunity. I think it's important first to give you a background of what the problem is. See, we are a product of our mom and dad, right? And if I can say that we all possess information in our cells, which we call DNA. I'm not going to get into the technical aspect, but that DNA, half of it comes from the mom, half of it comes from the dad. And changes in these small molecules have a profound influence on how we respond to a disease, or how a disease is actually caused, and how we respond to drugs that are produced when treating these diseases. And if you look at it from a global perspective, I think about 98 to 99% of that database of DNA information that's out there is predominantly biased towards Europeans. And we now know from research that Africans are very highly underrepresented in these global initiatives and global data sets. And so that means that any new diagnostic tool that will be out there, or any new drug that is designed for a particular treatment, will not be as effective on African people or people of colored populations compared to how effective it will be for someone who is European or a Caucasian ancestry. And that's the basis of the problem in Africa. And it really started when we attended a conference. So myself and Dr. Siana attended a conference in Cairo. We realized the gravity of the problem related to human genetics in the continent. And we realized that Tanzania does not have a society to begin with. Let aside doing any meaningful sort of research related to increasing the representation of some of these genetic conditions. I believe the only person that was really venturing into this at that time was Professor Julie Makani with sickle cell disease, which is in fact it is a genetic condition. Now, after understanding the problem, we really formed the Tanzania Human Genetics Organization. And within the organization, we have 5 main sort of operational areas. So we are interested in doing research, because without doing research, you will not be able to understand some of the DNA information that's there in our cells, to understand how can we diagnose this person, how can we treat this person. So research is extremely important. The second thing we do is we do training. I think in today's market, it's extremely important to build that workforce. We need counselors, we need bioinformaticians, we need clinical geneticists, we need molecular geneticists, we need ethical, legal, social guys that help us with our ethics of how we do, regulators. So there's so much, even lawyers come into this, and there's so much that needs to be addressed. So training is extremely important. We then have advocacy. Within advocacy, what we do is we speak not only to the patient organizations, but we also speak to the government. We create awareness at the low level, but we also try and advise how to create policies at the higher level in terms of how do we create programs that will generate the workforce? How do we ensure that our hospitals are well equipped to receive patients with genetic conditions? How do we ensure that we have the right molecular testing in place to enable precise diagnosis? Because I think the field of medicine is now evolving towards something called precision medicine, whereby you are literally using the environmental information, the personal information of the lifestyle and diet, as well as the DNA information of that person, to make informed decisions about how to treat a specific condition. The other thing we do is also with regards to therapeutics. And lastly, we do diagnostics. So all these 5 elements really need to come together so that we are able to ensure that genetics is an integral part of how we are doing our healthcare, how routine, it should be part of routine healthcare. And so that any decision that the clinician is making is based on a very fundamental sort of genetic code that's present in all of us. So with that, having said that, we initially formed the society in 2017. We had a working meeting for 2 years online, and then in 2019 we launched the organization, and 4 years from now we are all set to launch our national stakeholders meeting in November, where we will really be working with the government to chart a 10-year roadmap on how to accelerate the uptake of genetics in routine healthcare. And I think that's how we not only created a market for genetics, we are still creating awareness. I still think there's a lot of work to be done in Tanzania, but I think looking at ourselves 4 years, we can be quite proud of where we are.
Thank you, Mohamed. And I hope that, listening to this podcast will inspire some other people to come to your unconventional pathway and become a part of your movement. I also love how this session also became a genetics 101, which is what happens, guys, when you speak to people who are very passionate about the things that we do. Mohammed, thank you so much for giving us time today. Thank you everyone for listening to this podcast. I would like to plug Career Hub KSIJ. Please do follow us on all social media platforms for more content such as this podcast. Thank you.
Thank you very much.